Welcome back to Next Gen Console Watch 2020, our new show following all the news and rumors on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. I'm Damon Hatfield, and today I'm joined by Ryan McCaffrey, host of IGN's Xbox podcast, Podcast Unlocked.
Good to see you, Damon.
And Jonathan Dornbush, host of IGN's PlayStation podcast, Podcast Beyond.
Hey there.
So this week we're going to take a look at what developers are saying about the PS5 and Xbox Series X. And of course, we'll have poll results and a new poll for you. But first, let's talk about Assassin's Creed Valhalla. We got sort of a reveal cinematic trailer today. No gameplay, so we can't, we don't know yet if it, at a glance, looks like a next-gen game, although recent Assassin's Creeds or anything to go by, I'm sure it will be a gorgeous game. But what really struck me is that this trailer is bookended with Xbox Series X branding, meaning Ubisoft has partnered with Microsoft for marketing purposes for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. And I think this is the first big third-party game to sort of align themselves with one of the next-gen consoles. Ryan, do you think this is a big get for Microsoft?
Absolutely. I mean, Assassin's Creed, the profile of this franchise has only grown in recent years. You know, it was big early in its life, and then it kind of settled into that, it's one of those annual franchises that sells well, but people don't really get excited. And then eventually Ubisoft really started to play around with it in a creative way and really reinvent it. And we're now coming off of a break. We did not get an Assassin's Creed game last year. And the last one we did get, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, was extremely well received. It was more of a role-playing game than a sort of action-adventure open world. I mean, it was still open world, but it was definitely had a different vibe to it. And so, yeah, Assassin's Creed's riding high right now, and if that game is going to be, quote unquote, aligned with Xbox, that's certainly nice for Microsoft.
Yeah, it's entirely possible there could be some sort of exclusive costumes or some sort of exclusive content in the Xbox Series X version of the game. Conversely, Jonathan, do you think this is a blow for Sony and PS5?
I don't think so. I think we will still see people buy Assassin's Creed Valhalla wherever they're playing Assassin's Creed, whether they buy a new gen system. It will also be available for PS4 and Xbox One, so people who don't buy in will probably buy it on their system of choice. And given that PS4 is the more widely sold version, probably that version of the game will sell pretty well. I don't think this is a huge loss, especially because we've seen pretty recent Assassin's Creeds at least be flagship promoted during big Microsoft press conferences. The last Assassin's Creed or two was heavily promoted alongside the One X to show off the fidelity of that platform. So, this is sort of something I would have expected from this entry in the franchise, and it doesn't shock me too much.
But now you did interview the director of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, is that correct?
Yes, Ashraf Ismail, who has also been involved in a director role for Assassin's Creed Origins, which set off Assassin's Creed on this new RPG sort of focus, as well as Black Flag, which was the first new generation Assassin's Creed at the beginning of this gen. It was the first one on PS4 and Xbox One. But yeah, we spoke a little bit about the transition to PS5 and Xbox Series X, as well as everything going into this new entry.
Yeah, was he able to talk about anything that the next-gen consoles are allowing them to do?
Yeah, for sure. So we spoke a little bit about overall Assassin's Creed taking advantage of new technology. Of course, it will be available on PC as well as consoles. But speaking to me, Ashraf said, Assassin's Creed has always been committed to new technologies because our ambitions with these games and these worlds is to deliver the most immersive experience that we possibly can. So anytime there's new technology, we're very open to it, and our software is very open to it. And I talked a little bit to him about the transition and what this will mean. And he said Assassin's Creed Valhalla is meant to be a flagship game for next gen for Ubisoft. So they're very excited about taking advantage of this hardware.
That's a significant quote for me because since this is a cross-generation game that's going to be available on PS4 and Xbox One, it seems like they're really thinking of it as a primarily next-gen game, though.
Yeah, that seems to be the indication to me, especially because, we're getting this game being announced now, but we also know Ubisoft is working on Watch Dogs Legion, Gods and Monsters, and Rainbow Six Quarantine for both current gen and next gen, and those games were actually delayed to be able to facilitate those next gen. But this seems to be sort of we are pushing as this being a big next gen leap for this franchise. And speaking specifically to the technology that PS5 and Series X will allow for, Ashraf told me, quote, having significantly faster loading times effectively means we're able to remove some of the friction of the immersion we're trying to go after. We're trying to build the most immersive experiences we possibly can, so having extremely fast loading helps us out a lot with that. These worlds, the Dark Ages of England and Norway, these are breathtaking living worlds, so to be able to push them to an incredible potential is wonderful for us. And I think definitely, Black Flag before Odyssey was the biggest Assassin's Creed game, and that was at the beginning of this generation. They really, really were pushing those consoles. So given that this team did that on a technological scale back at the beginning of this gen, and then further pushed the evolution of the gameplay of this franchise with Origins, I totally expect them, along with the 14 co-development studios they're working with for this game. This is a massive Ubisoft undertaking. I think they are really trying to push Valhalla as a really, really big proper, here's what next gen and here's what this new technology can do.
Well, the trailer didn't give us an exact release date. It said holiday 2020. What do you guys think? To me, holiday means after October, so November or December. Do you think
I think the holiday vagueness is on purpose. I firmly believe this will be a day one title, seemingly for Series X, since they're market aligning with Xbox on this one. And then, of course, whether or not the PS5 is out yet or the PS5 comes out a week or two later, whatever it is. But I think I would be willing to place a very small wager that holiday 2020 translates to whatever day the Xbox Series X comes out.
I definitely think these are going to, the holiday vagueness is because the consoles have a holiday vague release date right now. And so Ubisoft can't sort of say a date that then suddenly probably sparks all the speculation that we would probably have about what does that mean for the PS5 and Series X launch dates. So I think they're a little beholden to that, but once we have dates for the consoles, I'm sure we'll see a release date for Valhalla that is right there, if not very close.
All right, well, viewers, we want to know which Assassin's Creed do you think is best in the series? Are you a big fan of Assassin's Creed 2, Black Flag, or the newer entries like Origins and Odyssey? Make sure to vote in our poll at IGN.com, and we will share the results with you next week. Let's move on to our second topic this week. We've got lots of chatter about developers sharing their opinions on both consoles, Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5. And one in particular, Chris Grenell, who spent almost 14 years at the now-defunct Studio Liverpool, which was responsible for Wipeout. He also spent time at Guerrilla Games. He was on a podcast this week, RDX podcast, explaining he believes Sony was caught off guard by Xbox Series X's specs. And he said, PS5 is not a bad console. It's an absolute beast of a piece of hardware, but it's just a piece of hardware which is slower on numerous kinds of paths than what Microsoft has put together. The machine that Microsoft has put together is an absolute beast compared to what Sony has put together. So both are absolute beasts, according to Chris Grenell. He also believes that Sony has, quote, rested on their laurels after the success of the PS4. He says, quote, they've got this massive market share and lead, and they've done a kind of PS3, is what I've been hearing. It's not that bad in terms of hardware and complications and things like that, but just a little bit of they didn't really appreciate what Xbox were going to try and do in terms of this power narrative. Is what he's saying true? Do you think history is about to repeat itself where what happened with the PlayStation 3?
I mean, I think it's definitely going to come down to what we see when they start talking price and games that are available for the console, because right now I think Sony is definitely holding back a lot, and they are definitely at least resting a little bit on their laurels. And, we have seen that really cause problems for them at the launch of the PS3 for sure. But they are in this interesting place, like we've talked about on the show and a lot of our other console-specific shows. We reported on just the PS5 logo reveal in January at CES, and that was a huge story on IGN. Like, PlayStation has been able to succeed still with much smaller content drops because they're not coming from a place where they need to prove as much compared to Microsoft. That said, I do think Microsoft has done a much better job at showing us why we should want to buy a Series X at launch. And so Sony hasn't even really gotten to that beat of their marketing yet, which is odd. But
even Michael Jordan, one of the most famously competitive people of all time, if you're watching The Last Dance on ESPN right now, talked about how, heading into the kind of stretch run of their championship, their dynasty, that he even said, I kind of got, I started to not work as hard and thought, and even he needed a wake-up call. Michael Jordan, and you might kind of disregard that as a flippant comment, and maybe you should, but in all seriousness, what we have seen from Sony is that, as Jonathan has said, they've got such a massive lead. But the key, I think, is, or at least the possibility that maybe this developer's quote, there could be some merit to it, is the fact that Sony has seen a lot of executive turnover, a lot of key people, key executives, key personnel, key decision makers have left Sony over the past few years. And so, we don't really know a ton about the people that have replaced them. And maybe it is kind of a, well, we know we've got the games, fans know that they've got the games, and who's to say that Sony themselves doesn't just go, well, yeah, we've got our first-party studios, let's maybe not invest quite as much in the box itself, because we've got our 11 killer worldwide first-party studios, so let's not even sweat it. I mean, it could happen. It's possible.
Well, and you have this interesting point too, and not that, Microsoft does have a pretty consistent outpouring of exclusives this year to market, but with Sony, they are currently focused with the end of the PS4 life on The Last of Us Part 2, arguably sequel to their most critically acclaimed game of all time, as well as Ghost of Tsushima, which is a really highly anticipated core game for the PS4 fan base that comes from another beloved Sony first-party studio. And so they are having to deal with what has essentially been two pillars of the PS4's marketing promise for the last 3 years, really, of this console. These have been two of those flagship games they have been promoting for years. And they still have to worry about getting those out the door. And of course, we've seen release date delays and all this stuff. So their attention has been split in a different way than Xbox has, because Xbox really has been saying, we are looking forward. And Sony is still trying to wrap everything up.
Yeah, those are good points. We also have several other quotes from developers that are really excited about the PlayStation 5. Pete Hines from Bethesda is really impressed with the DualSense controller. He says, I've gotten to try the haptic feedback and adaptive triggers on this thing. I was very impressed. I think games are going to do some really cool things with them. You sort of immediately forget about a PS4 controller. I went back and forth between them, and you immediately just want to use the PS5 or the DualSense 5 controller. I guess it's just DualSense controller. Jonathan, does that get you excited about what Sony's doing with the DualSense?
Yeah, that really excites me, especially because I think the DualShock 4 is pretty unanimously their most beloved, and certainly for me, best controller they've made for all time. Obviously, it depends on, offset to the symmetrical analog stick preference, even still when you're going between Xbox and PlayStation. But I think this is the best DualShock we've ever had. And so to find out that the DualSense seemingly maybe even more engaging and more exciting and better really, really gets me excited for what they're doing with that controller.
And then the head of Ready at Dawn has a quote. They said, "Dollar bet," this is on Twitter, "dollar bet within a year from its launch, gamers will fully appreciate that the PlayStation 5 is one of the most revolutionary, inspired home consoles ever designed, and will feel silly for having spent energy arguing about teraflops and other similarly misunderstood specs." Ryan, how does that quote strike you?
Somebody wants to make the Order 1887.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
I'm kidding. Although I would happily play that game. Flaws and all, I enjoyed it. But hey, I hope he's right. I mean, that Ready at Dawn's, I'm sure, been privy to what Sony's. They had a close relationship with them for a while there. They've been doing a lot of VR stuff lately. But yes, I would happily pay out $1 to him if indeed proves to be the case. That'd be great.
Yeah, that's a pretty safe bet. Finally this week, let's talk very briefly about Phil Spencer's comments. He's excited about a new feature on Xbox Series X, dynamic latency input. He says, "I'm very focused on the work we're doing around DLI. In my view, the feel of games this upcoming generation will change as dramatically as any since 2D to 3D, given CPU upgrade, DLI, memory bandwidth, and SSD." Ryan, do you feel like you have a grasp of what dynamic latency input is?
A bit. I mean, I think the best way to think about it, I mean, the Xbox, all console, well, particularly Sony and Microsoft, maybe less Nintendo, but PlayStation and Xbox have been becoming slowly and transparently as well in different ways, becoming more and more PC-like. And I think the best way to think about it is like when you buy a super high DPI mouse and then you jump into a competitive game, and then you were to go back to an old mouse, it would be a night and day difference. Where like, wow, I just do not have nearly the instant response time as I do on my new awesome DPI mouse. So I think that's kind of how I'm thinking about it with his quote with DLI, that they're really trying to improve the responsiveness of the controller for as soon as you do something, it's like it's happened. There's no input lag, no delay. So if it's the equivalent of jumping up to a super high DPI mouse, that sounds great.
And Jonathan, is this something that Sony has talked about at all?
Not particularly so. We haven't really gotten a sense of them. Latency and the struggle to overcome it has definitely seemed to be more of a something we've seen from Xbox this time around. I think Sony is, at least so far, they have been extremely tech heavy, but it's been a lot more on the 3D audio applications they're looking for, on the other advantages they believe the DualSense has. Instead of eliminating latency, what if it was really hard to move your character because you felt like you were stuck in mud? That they seem to be talking more about the experiential aspect of it, and that makes sense because at the end of the day, so many of their first-party games, at least, are really more focused on that story, narrative-driven experience, and maybe you don't need to be worrying about headshots or the accuracy and pinpoint speed with which you're playing when you're focused more on how beautiful Kratos' next adventure may look. So I get why this maybe hasn't been a talking point for them as much.
Also good points. Okay, last week in our poll, we asked you which rumored or confirmed Sony tech is most exciting to you. And I'm a little bit surprised by the results. The winner with 32% was finger sensing VR controllers. Does that surprise you guys?
It not completely, if only because right now with PSVR, which I love, we're operating with 4-year-old tech compared to some of the more advanced VR headsets. PSVR came out in 2016, and then the controllers for it are based on the PlayStation Move controllers from the PS3 era. So we're functionally dealing with, decade-old technology that could really stand to use an upgrade and come up to par with the rest of VR. Obviously, VR is more of a niche compared to the, base PS5 that people will buy, but it would really be nice to see stuff advance there because it does feel like we've hit the limit of what PSVR can really deliver.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, once you've had a chance to try the newer second generation VR tech on PC, the Index specifically of being at the top end of that list, I had the privilege of playing through Half-Life Alyx with that, and it's to go back to the PSVR after that is a tough task. And so if on a PS5 we can get them caught up with the PSVR 2, including the finger tracking controllers, that would be just open up a whole new library of awesome game potential for PS5.
Yeah, we are still waiting for Sony to talk about its next-gen VR plans, but that will have to be a topic for another episode of Next Gen Console Watch, because that's going to do it for this edition. Thank you both, Ryan and Jonathan. We will be back next Friday at 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern with more PS5 and Xbox Series X news. We'll see you then.